Hello, everyone. Welcome to another class in our philosophy club. Today, we're starting a new series called French Philosophers. We're going to be looking at many different philosophers who are originated or who studied a long time in France. I'm going to try to tie in kind of France country with their philosophy, but fundamentally, I think in a lot of cases, philosophy isn't defined by the country. So, unlike literature, for example, where we traveled around Europe and we saw a lot of the cultures and history shaping it, philosophy is something that fundamentally transcends that. It's something that transcends daily life, transcends particular historical circumstances or particular people, and that it tries to directly connote the universal things. And so it's not necessarily influenced by France as a country, but it might be because of previous French philosophers that were famous that they were educated by that impacted them later on. So yeah, with these in mind, let's begin looking at French philosophers. The first person I want to talk to you about today is Rene Descartes. Yeah, so have you heard of Rene Descartes? I think his name is just a well-known name, and it's a fun name to say, and that's something that keeps him in my memory. But Rene Descartes was a French philosopher, and he was like many other geniuses. A lot of things went at once. He worked as a mathematician. He was a scientist. He, I believe, also wrote a lot. Um, I I believe he wrote certain literature, but I am not certain. And he is just widely regarded as the father of modern philosophy. And again, he was born in 1596, died in 1650, and around this era, it was when I think it was pre-enlightenment, but it was at a time when science was starting to evolve and people were kind of thinking, like we could figure some of this out. We could try to, you know, find out what ethics is, what morality is. We could kind of define this in a human way instead of relying on religion, and that's the kind of idea that influenced modern philosophy. He is known for a lot of philosophical ideas. Some of his most important ideas are just skepticism, and also called the phrase cogito ergo sum. I think, therefore I am. The pronunciation probably was egregiously wrong, but the phrase I think, therefore I am is something that is very, very philosophically profound, yet it's something that I'm sure you have heard of. And it's a line that, you know, when you think of philosophers, it's one of the first things that comes to mind. It's like, I think, and therefore I am. Yeah, and his philosophy fundamentally is a epistemology, metaphysics, physics, mathematics, something that combines all of this into a knowledge-based idea of science and mathematics, and it's the stances are very, very nuanced, and I'm going to be trying to present as nuanced a version of it as possible. But just keep in mind that obviously the ideas that I can present to you are very, very limited in this video, and my philosophical knowledge is very significantly limited as a student. And therefore, if you do feel that you want to learn more about Rene Descartes, visit some philosophy uh, uh, students, college students that have learned philosophy. I recommend people like Unsolicited Advice, for example, and also look at some of the books that explain Rene Descartes' philosophy. Either it be a book written for students, or whether it's an actual book written by Rene Descartes himself. It's very, very important that you actually look at the primary sources and kind of experience him for yourself. But moving on, let's look at the philosophical context that he lived in again, because he lived in a very early modern period, and later on, and even with the people that we've previously looked at, a lot of them lived in the Enlightenment era, and that's where a lot of the great philosophers of our time that are well renowned were living. And that's because that was the moment, that was the point in history, I think one of the points in history, where people thought, you know what, we can do this on our own. We don't have to think about God. We can define what ethics is. We can tell you what good is, what the meaning of life is. I can all figure this out. And not that philosophy didn't exist previously, but it's a system that increased a lot during the Enlightenment era. And in his case, in Descartes' it kind of is the same thing. Also, here it says the scientific revolution, right? The scientific revolution kind of predates the Enlightenment era, and it's at the time in which science fundamentally made lots of breakthroughs. And this, again, because this philosophy was also impacted by science, it really challenged traditional views of the universe. And yeah, and there were a lot of the groundbreaking, revolutionary ideas like Galileo and the Copernicus, which is the idea that the sun does not revolve around the earth, but that the earth revolves around the sun. And these ideas, these new scientific revolutions, did in a lot of cases conflict with the church's teaching, because the church said, you know, the earth is that important because God created it that way, and then Copernicus and his findings are like, no, but the earth is revolving around the sun. And so these kind of scientific era is when Descartes was born, and he responded to these intellectual upheavals and revolutions by developing his new ideas that focused on reason, skepticism, and a search for a certain knowledge, for a scientific kind of knowledge, and moving away from authority and medieval scholasticism. And so he was in trend, if you think about it this way, he was in trend with Galileo, Copernicus. He was moving towards an era when they rejected just naive, kind of naive and blind trust in authorities that were like the church, for example, or people who were quote unquote think of as intellectuals. Yeah, so let's look at two of his most famous works. The first book that I have for you is Meditations on First Philosophy. So, Meditations on First Philosophy is his most famous work, I think, and it's something that has like a lot of philosophical works that we have seen. It just comprehends a lot of beliefs that it's impossible to kind of say what it is in one word, but it's some he looks at a lot of different things. So he employs the his again famous idea of skepticism. He has a radical doubt about everything. He questions the authority of everything. It's like, do I even have my own body? Is this world even real? Is there even an external world, or is it just everything? Is everything just made in my own mind? And his works kind of search for these indubitable truths, something that is so pure that it cannot be doubted. And Descartes, the famous line, I think, therefore I am, is talking about the uncertainty of being. It's like, I think it comes from the question, am I even alive? Is this body that I am in actually real in the metaphysical sense? And then Descartes thought, oh, I am thinking, right? I am using what is in my body, whether it be a brain, a soul, what kind of mental mechanism that is within my body, in order to think, an active action of asserting my own reason. And this is a sign of being. And he was like, oh, I think, therefore I am. That is where the famous line came from. So Descartes Descartes finally concludes that the only certainty is his own existence as a thinking being. That is his conclusion, that it is only possible that I confirm my own existence through my thinking. And that's fundamentally, I think, that's something that makes sense. It's kind of a fine line to tread also, because it's kind of hard to think about it that way, that the only thing I can really affirm exists in this world is my own being. And Descartes' work isn't only about this. It explores a lot of different things. It talks about the mind and the body, how they interact, the soul, and the essay, as Plato says this. And these kind of ideas were always continually existent, but I think the way we deal with it kind of changed too, because now, as with Descartes, they completely decided to reject authority, blind belief in things, and they were like, you know what? I'm gonna try to look for only logical reasons to explains the things around me. And yeah, he also talks about the possibility of knowledge, and this all lays the foundation of a kind of logical based philosophy that we see in our modern days. Yeah, so again, I think I covered a lot of this, but he also talks about things about whether sensory perceptions are real, and whether there is a existence of the outside external world. And a key theme is dualism, the distinction between the mind and the body. And he he does argue that mind is a non-material substance separated from the material body, although this is a bit nuanced, so I won't go into details about this. His works also talk about the existence of God and, you know, the idea that if there was a benevolent God, they probably would not deceive us, and thus ensuring the possibility of certain knowledge. And now I don't want to, again, talk too much about the theological aspects because I know that religious students might be watching this, and that's completely fine. It's something um, that has always been in contention. It's always been a controversy whether God exists, what kind of God exists, you know. But this is just Descartes' way of looking at it. He said, you know, if a God exists, he wouldn't deceive us. If he was benevolent enough to you know, if he loved us enough as he tells us, he wouldn't try to, you know, hide himself from us. And you know, this has been defeated, I believe, by a lot of theologians like C.S. Lewis. I don't know if whether they do it successfully or not is something for you to decide. But in Mere Christianity, they raise arguments against the idea that there can be no evil, for example, that there can be no deceptions, there can be no hidden mints or hiding yourself as God from the people if you love the people enough. These ideas have been disputed, and so don't look at this and say, oh, you know, like Descartes said that God doesn't exist, and so God has been disproven. Case over, done, bye. That is not the question. And the reason that there are so many philosophers, there are so many different religious ideas and different religious section is because this is undetermined. It is fundamentally something that you need to decide on your own and through your own learning. But without going astray, let's go back to Descartes. Again, the famous lines, I think, therefore I am. And this is, I think, something that embodies radical skepticism. He doubts everything except his own thinking and his own existence that derives from it. And and even if an evil demon is deceiving him, the act of doubting proves his own existence. And so these ideas continued to remain one of the most influential things in history. And I think it started the idea that when you are beginning to think about philosophy, when you are trying to redefine the world in your own terms, you need to start off doubting everything. You cannot accept that the external world exists. You cannot accept the superficial way in which things are presented. You need to, through logical and very careful um, a very careful observation of all the things around you, gather all the logical chains, and then arrive at a conclusion. And for Descartes, that was the emphasis of self-awareness as the foundation of knowledge. Okay, let's move on to the second book. Ooh, give me a second. Oh yeah, my bad. Yeah, so this is just about his kind of the impact of his works, but Descartes' meditations shaped philosophy by emphasizing reason and skepticism, as we have said, and his works also lay the foundation of the Enlightenment and influenced thinkers like John Locke and Immanuel Kant. And the reason it did is because he laid the foundation of a reason-based philosophy, and so he rejected all the religious authorities, all the traditional authorities, and he said, you know what, I'm going to start off doubting everything. You need to logically prove how this works. And the Enlightenment thinkers picked that up, as we have seen with Immanuel Kant. Yeah, so Descartes' emphasis on reason and certainty really paved the way for our understanding of modern philosophy, of epistemology, and scientific inquiry as well, because he was a scientist and a mathematician as well as a philosopher. Okay, his another very, very well-renowned book is Discourse on the Method. In the Discourse on the Method, Descartes explores themes of skepticism and reason, as we have previously seen in the meditations on first philosophy. Yeah, so he argues that knowledge must be built on clear and distinct ideas and rejects reliance on sense perception and external authorities. Again, the same kind of ideas. Yeah, let's go into exactly how the things are dealt with. So, yeah, it was published in 1637, so 13 years before he died at quite an old age, and this is after the meditations on first philosophy was published, and he kind of develops the idea that he first introduced there, and he continues to advocate for a systemic and very rational approach to knowledge and inquiry and reasoning. So Descartes really fundamentally says, like, get rid of all the traditional authority, get rid of all the scholastic methods that have been using, and we're just going to start from scratch. We're going to look at it not from top up, from top down, but from bottom up, if that makes sense. Yeah, so he believed that knowledge should be derived from only reason and very clear distinctive ideas that you can fundamentally prove. And the works he fame and these famous works, they presented his very famous principles. It kind of concreted it in a sense, the ideas that he first presented in meditations of the first philosophy, and it became a tool for discovering the truth for a lot of the Enlightenment thinkers. Yeah, so a famous quote is, "The preservation of health should be the first study of one who is of any worth to oneself." And here, this is not a significant part of the book, but Descartes also does mention that one's faculty, one's both mental and physical um, aspects of it, is really important in clear thinking and reasoning. And again, this connects to the idea of dualism, the fact that your mentality and your body is separate, and that's why your health should be of both mental and physical. And it really underscores the belief that rationality and self-assessment, self-care is important to produce a good philosophy and also a good life, because fundamentally philosophy is in the search of a good life, right? Yeah, and so later impacts, this is also very similar, but his ideas of skepticism also influenced later empiricists, and we're going to be talking about this a bit more when we get to people like David Hume. But yeah, he continued to advocate for a scientific method in his works. And one of the people that he influenced the most was Baruch Spinoza, and he was a Dutch philosopher, so wasn't in French like Descartes, but he was heavily influenced by Descartes, and he fundamentally agreed with his skepticism and benefits of reason, but Spinoza, he rejected Descartes' dualism and argued that the mind and the body are one, which is again in line with philosophers like Plato, and he identified with God and nature, God or nature, these substances that we're made of. And so this was also a difference that we see. And as we have said, again, even if you rely on reason and logic as your basic ideas, you can still believe in God. You can in a method use logic to prove God. You can use logic to disprove God. Logic in and of itself does not prove or disprove God. I think that's a very important message. And Spinoza, he developed a pantheistic system, and he integrated Descartes' rationalism with a more holistic view, an overall view of the universe, and later he was someone to influence writers like Nietzsche. Yeah, and another person, as we have mentioned, is John Locke. John Locke was an English philosopher, and he wrote a lot of books. But his most famous work, I think, is a treaty of the two nations. Possibly, I am sorry if that is the wrong title, but yeah, his most famous works. He also uses the empiricist approach, the rationalistic approach, and yeah, and it's I think he's very similar to Descartes in a lot of ways. Yeah, guys, thank you so much. This is just some of the ideas of Descartes. As I was doing research here, I really realized that fundamentally his ideas were almost always derived from the ideas of truths, of skepticism, of rationality, and everything that he later talked of is based on this idea. And I didn't want to go into too much details about dualism, ideas like that he presented, and his arguments with morality, for example, and God, because those are very, very fine lines that we have to step. And I was just trying to present a very overview way that in which his philosophy kind of came from. But if you are someone who is interested in learning more about Descartes, I definitely recommend that you look more into his work, that you search online on Google or YouTube into his work, and you acquaint yourself with this brilliant mastermind of the 1600s. Thank you so much for watching me. Yeah, and I hope you have a great day and a great academic journey towards learning about all these philosophers. Thank you so much, and bye bye.